The morning sun cast long shadows across the marble floors of the Grand Hyatt Seoul, where wedding preparations were in full swing. In the penthouse suite, 26-year-old Park Min-ju sat motionless before an ornate mirror, her reflection staring back with eyes that held no joy, only resignation. The wedding dress, a masterpiece of silk and lace worth more than most people's annual salary, hung on her petite frame like a beautiful prison. "Miss Park, you look absolutely radiant," cooed the wedding planner, adjusting the cathedral-length veil for the 100th time. "Mr. Choi will be speechless when he sees you." Minju's stomach churned at the mention of her groom. Choi Sung-ho, heir to the Choi Group conglomerate, was everything her parents had ever wanted in a son-in-law: wealthy, well-connected, and willing to merge his family's shipping empire with her father's electronics dynasty. What he wasn't, however, was someone she could ever love. The engagement had been arranged 6 months ago, a business transaction disguised as romance. Minju had tried to object, but her father's words still echoed in her mind. "Love is a luxury we cannot afford, Minju. This marriage will secure our family's future for generations." As the makeup artist applied the final touches to her lipstick, Minju's phone buzzed with a text from her best friend, Yujin. "Last chance to run away. My car is still parked in the back alley. Just say the word." Minju's fingers trembled as she read the message. Run away? The thought had crossed her mind countless times. But where would she go? Her entire life was mapped out, controlled by her father's iron grip and society's expectations. She was Park Min-ju, the perfect daughter, the obedient heiress who never stepped out of line. "5 minutes until we head downstairs," announced her mother, Park Hae-yo, sweeping into the room like a force of nature. Her designer hanbok rustled with each step, and her smile was practiced perfection. "You look beautiful, darling. Your father is so proud." Proud. The word felt like a knife twisting in Minju's chest. How could he be proud when he was essentially selling her to the highest bidder? The wedding march began to play from the ballroom below, and Minju's heart started racing. This was it. In less than an hour, she would be Mrs. Choi Sung-ho, and her life as she knew it would be over. "Let's go," her mother said, reaching for Minju's hand. But as they approached the elevator, something inside Minju snapped. Maybe it was the suffocating weight of the dress, or the thought of spending the rest of her life pretending to love a man who saw her nothing more than a business asset. Or maybe it was simply the realization that if she didn't take control of her life now, she never would. I need a moment," Minju whispered, pulling away from her mother's grasp. "Darling, we don't have time. Please, Amma, just 1 minute." Her mother's expression softened slightly. "Of course, but don't take too long. The guests are waiting." The moment her mother disappeared into the elevator, Minju made her decision. She kicked off her impossibly high heels, grabbed the layers of her dress, and ran. The wedding planner's shocked cries echoed behind her as she sprinted down the hotel corridor, her veil streaming like a white flag of surrender, or perhaps rebellion. She burst through the emergency exit door, setting off alarms that seemed to scream her defiance to the world. The narrow stairwell was dimly lit, but Minju didn't care. She was finally moving, finally choosing her own path, even if she had no idea where it led. 18 floors. That's how far she had to go to reach freedom. Her dress caught on the metal railings, and she could hear the delicate fabric tearing, but she didn't stop. With each step, she felt lighter, as if she was shedding not just altitude, but the weight of everyone else's expectations. By the time she reached the ground floor, she was breathless and disheveled. Her perfectly styled hair had come undone, and her makeup was smudged, but she had never felt more alive. She pushed open the door to the alley behind the hotel, and the cool Seoul air hit her face like a blessing. But freedom, she quickly realized, was more complicated than she had imagined. She was standing in a narrow alley in the heart of Gangnam, wearing a torn wedding dress, with no shoes, no money, and no plan. The reality of her situation began to sink in. What had she done? Panic started to set in as she heard voices from inside the hotel. They would be looking for her soon. Her parents, the wedding planner, the guests. Everyone would be searching for the runaway bride. She needed to get as far away as possible, but her legs felt like jelly, and the torn dress made it impossible to move quickly. That's when she saw him. He was leaning against a motorcycle at the end of the alley, smoking a cigarette and scrolling through his phone. Even from a distance, she could tell he was nothing like the men in her social circle. His dark hair was tousled, not perfectly styled, and he wore a simple black leather jacket over a white t-shirt and jeans. There was something raw and authentic about him that made her heart skip a beat. Their eyes met across the alley, and time seemed to freeze. He looked at her with a mixture of curiosity and concern, taking in her disheveled wedding dress and bare feet. For a moment, neither of them moved. Then, as awakening from a trance, he stubbed out his cigarette and walked toward her. "Are you okay?" he asked, his voice gentle but firm. Minju opened her mouth to speak, but no words came out. How could she explain that she had just run away from her own wedding, that she was the daughter of one of Korea's most powerful business tycoons, and she had just thrown away everything her family had worked for? I need to get out of here," she started, then stopped. The sound of shouting from inside the hotel was getting closer. He studied her face for a moment, and she could see the wheels turning in his mind. He didn't ask for explanations or demand to know her story. Instead, he simply nodded and gestured toward his motorcycle. "Can you ride?" he asked. Minju had never been on a motorcycle in her life. Her parents would have been horrified at the mere suggestion. But as the voices from the hotel grew louder, she realized that she didn't have a choice. "Yes," she lied. He pulled off his leather jacket and handed it to her. "Put this on. It'll be cold." As she slipped into the jacket, she caught a sniff of his scent, a mixture of leather, cologne, and something uniquely him. It was intoxicating in a way that made her feel dizzy. "Hold on tight," he said, starting the engine. Minju climbed onto the back of the motorcycle, her wedding dress bunching up around her legs. The moment she wrapped her arms around his waist, she felt a jolt of electricity that had nothing to do with fear and everything to do with the proximity of this mysterious stranger. They roared out of the alley just as hotel security emerged from the building. Minju pressed her face against his back, partly to hide from view and partly because she couldn't bear to look back at the life she was leaving behind. They rode through the streets of Seoul, weaving between cars and taking shortcuts that only a local would know. The city blurred past them in a kaleidoscope of neon signs and glass towers. Minju had lived in Seoul her entire life, but she had never seen it like this, free and unfiltered, without the tinted windows of her family's luxury cars. After what felt like hours, but was probably only 20 minutes, they finally stopped. Minju looked around and realized they were in Hongdae, a vibrant neighborhood known for its indie music scene and bohemian atmosphere. It was a world away from the polished perfection of Gangnam. "This should be far enough," he said, turning off the engine. Minju reluctantly let go of his waist and climbed off the motorcycle. Her legs were shaky, and she realized she was trembling, whether from the cold, the adrenaline, or the proximity to this stranger. She couldn't tell. "Thank you," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. He turned to face her, and she got her first really good look at him. He was probably around her age, maybe a year or two older, with sharp features and dark eyes that seemed to see right through her carefully constructed facade. There was a small scar above his left eyebrow that gave him a slightly dangerous look, and when he smiled, her heart did a little flip. "I'm Kate Min," he said, extending his hand. "Minju," she replied, taking his hand. The moment their skin touched, she felt that same electric jolt, and from the way his eyes widened slightly, she knew he felt it too. "Well, Minju, I guess you have quite a story." She looked down at her dawn wedding dress and laughed, a sound that surprised even her. When was the last time she had genuinely laughed? "You could say that. Are you hungry? I know a place that serves the best kimchi jjigae in Seoul, and they don't care if you're wearing a wedding dress." The kindness in his voice almost brought tears to her eyes. Here was a complete stranger who had helped her stay without asking for anything in return. And now he was offering to feed her. It was more consideration than her own fiancé had ever shown her. "I don't have any money," she admitted, embarrassed. "My treat," he said simply. He led her through the winding streets of Hongdae to a small restaurant tucked between a vintage clothing store and a record shop. The Ajumma who ran the place took one look at Minju's wedding dress and raised her eyebrow, but Taemin said something to her in a low voice and she nodded, leading them to a corner table. As they sat across from each other, Minju couldn't help but study Taemin's face. There was something familiar about him, but she couldn't place it. His hands were calloused, suggesting he worked with them, and there was a small tattoo on his wrist that looked like musical notes. "So," he said, pouring water for both of them, "are you going to tell me why you were running through an alley in a wedding dress?" Minju took a sip of water, buying herself time. How much should she tell him? The truth was complicated, and she wasn't sure she was ready to share it with a stranger, no matter how kind he seemed. "I couldn't go through with it," she said finally. "The wedding, I mean. It wasn't what I wanted."
Taemin nodded as if he understood completely. And what do you want? The question caught her off guard. What did she want? She had spent so many years following other people's plans for her life that she had forgotten to consider her own desires. I don't know, she admitted. I've never really thought about it. Well, he said, leaning back in his chair, now you have time to figure it out. The ajumma brought their food and they ate in a comfortable silence. The kimchi jjigae was indeed the best Minju had ever tasted, rich and spicy and warming her from the inside out. She couldn't remember the last time she had enjoyed a meal so much. What about you? She asked eventually. What do you do? Taemin smiled, and she noticed he had a dimple in his left cheek. I'm a musician. I play guitar in a band called Midnight Seoul. Are you famous? She asked, and immediately felt foolish for the question. He laughed, and the sound was warm and genuine. Hardly. We play small venues, mostly here in Hongdae. We're working on our first album, but it's a slow process. There was something in his voice that made her think there was more to the story, but she didn't press. They were both entitled to their secrets. I've never been to a live music show, she confessed. Never? He looked genuinely shocked. What do you do for fun? Minju realized she didn't have a good answer to that question either. Her life had been so structured, so planned, that fun had never really been a priority. I read, and I take piano lessons. Piano? His interest was piqued. Classical? Mostly, some jazz. We should play together sometime, and her heart did that fluttering thing again. As the evening wore on, they talked about everything and nothing. Taemin told her about his band, his dreams of making it in the music industry, his part-time job at a music store. He spoke with such passion about his art that Minju found herself envious. She couldn't remember ever feeling that passionate about anything. What about your family? Are they supportive of your music? Something flickered across his face, so quickly she almost missed it. My parents died when I was 16, he said quietly. Car accident. I've been on my own since then. Minju's heart clenched. Here she was, complaining about her controlling parents, and he had lost his entirely. I'm sorry, she said, reaching across the table to touch his hand. It's okay, he said, but you could see the pain in his eyes. It was a long time ago. I've learned to take care of myself. The vulnerability in his voice made her want to protect him, which was ironic, considering he was the one who had rescued her. There was something about Taemin that made her feel safe, but also alive in a way she had never experienced before. By the time they left the restaurant, it was nearly midnight. The streets of Hongdae were still buzzing with activity. Street performers, young couples, groups of friends laughing and talking. Minju had never been out this late without a chaperone or security detail, and the freedom was intoxicating. Where will you go? Taemin asked, as they walked slowly down the street. The question brought her back to reality. She couldn't go home. Her parents would be furious, and they would probably force her to marry Sung-ho anyway. She couldn't go to any of her friends' houses. Her parents would find her there within hours. I don't know, she admitted. I didn't really think this through. Taemin stopped walking and turned to face her. You can stay with me, he said. I have a small apartment above the music store where I work. It's not much, but it's safe. Minju's heart raced. She barely knew this man, and yet she trusted him completely. There was something about him that made her feel like she could tell him anything, be anything. I don't want to impose, she said. You're not imposing, I'm offering. She looked into his eyes and saw nothing but sincerity. Okay, she said. Thank you. His apartment was indeed small, just a studio with a kitchenette and a bathroom. But it was filled with music equipment, guitars hanging on the walls and stacks of CDs everywhere. It felt lived in and loved, so different from the sterile perfection of her family's mansion. You can take the bed, he said, pulling out a spare blanket. I'll sleep on the couch. No, I couldn't. He insisted. You've had a long day. That was an understatement. Minju felt like she had lived a lifetime in the past 12 hours. She had awoken as Park Minju, the obedient daughter preparing for her arranged marriage. Now she was... Who was she? Taemin gave her one of his t-shirts to sleep in, and she changed in the bathroom, grateful to finally be out of the wedding dress. Looking at herself in the mirror, she barely recognized the woman staring back at her. Her hair was messy, her makeup was gone, and she was wearing a stranger's clothes. But for the first time in years, she looked real. When she emerged from the bathroom, Taemin was tuning his guitar on the couch. He looked up at her and smiled, and she felt that familiar flutter in her chest again. "Can't sleep?" she asked. "I'm a night owl," he said. "Comes with the musician territory. But I'll be quiet if you need to rest." "Actually," she said, sitting on the edge of the bed, "could you play something? I'd like to hear you." He looked surprised but pleased. "Any requests?" "Something hopeful," she said. "Something about new beginnings." Taemin's fingers found the strings and he began to play a melody that was both melancholy and uplifting. His voice when he began to sing was rough around the edges but full of emotion. The lyrics were in Korean, but Minju didn't need to understand every word to feel the meaning. It was a song about finding yourself, about having the courage to start over. As she listened, tears began to fall down her cheeks. She wasn't sure if she was crying for the life that she had left behind or the uncertain future ahead. Maybe both. When the song ended, Taemin set down his guitar and looked at her with concern. "Are you okay?" "I think so," she said, wiping her eyes. "That was beautiful. Did you write it?" "Yeah," he said, looking almost embarrassed. "It's not finished yet. I've been working on it for months." "It's perfect," she said, and meant it. They talked for another hour, sharing stories and dreams. Minju found herself opening up to him in a way she had never done with anyone. He listened without judgment, offering comfort when she needed it, and making her laugh when the conversation got too heavy. Finally, exhaustion overtook her, and she fell asleep to the sound of his gentle breathing from the couch. She woke to the smell of coffee and the sound of someone moving around in the kitchen. For a moment she was disoriented, forgetting where she was. Then, it all came rushing back. The wedding, the escape, Taemin. "Good morning," he said, offering her a cup of coffee. "How did you sleep?" "Better than I have in months," she said, accepting the cup gratefully. "Thank you." "He didn't have to thank me," he said. "I'm just glad you're safe." Safe. It was such a simple word, but it meant everything. She had never felt truly safe before, always worried about living up to expectations, about making the wrong choice. But here, in this tiny apartment with this kind stranger, she felt protected. "I should probably call my friend," she said, remembering Eugene's offer to help. "Let her know I'm okay." "Of course," Taemin said, handing her his phone. Eugene answered on the first ring. "Minju, oh my God, where are you? Your parents are going crazy. They've got the police looking for you." "I'm safe," Minju said. "I'm with a friend." "What friend? I don't know any friends of yours who would." "A new friend," Minju interrupted. "Eugene, I need you to do something for me. I need some clothes, some money, and my passport." "Your passport? Minju, what are you planning?" "I don't know yet, but I need options." There was a pause. "Okay," Eugene said finally. "I'll figure something out. Where should I meet you?" Minju looked at Taemin, who nodded. "Hongdae," she said. "I'll text you the address." After she hung up, Taemin sat beside her on the couch. "Your parents called the police?" "They're probably more worried about the scandal than my safety," Minju said bitterly. "The daughter of Park Group running away from her wedding, it'll be all over the news." "What will you do?" "I don't know," she admitted. "I've never made a decision this big in my life. I've always just done what was expected of me." "What does your heart tell you?" She looked at him, this man who had shown her more kindness in one night than she had received in years. "My heart tells me I want to keep getting to know you," she said, surprising herself with her honesty. Taemin's eyes widened and she could see her own feelings reflected in his. "Minju, I know it's crazy," she said quickly. "I know we just met and I know I'm a mess right now, but..."
This way about anyone before. When I'm with you, I feel like I can be myself. I don't have to pretend or perform or be perfect. He reached for her hand, and she felt that familiar spark. "You are perfect," he said softly, "just as you are." Before she could lose her nerve, she leaned forward and kissed him. It was her first real kiss, not the polite pecks she had exchanged with Sung-ho, but something deep and meaningful and full of promise. When they broke apart, she was breathless. "I should warn you," she said, her forehead resting against his. "I am probably going to be headline news in a few hours. Dating me comes with complications." "I don't care."
he said, his thumb tracing her cheek. We'll figure it out together. The next few hours passed in a blur. Yujin arrived with a bag of clothes and enough cash to last Minju several days. She took one look at Taemin and whispered to Minju, "He's gorgeous. Where did you find him?" "He found me," Minju said, and it felt like the most honest thing she had ever said. By afternoon, the story had indeed hit the news. Photos of her in her wedding dress fleeing the hotel were splashed across every website and newspaper. The headlines ranged from sympathetic, runaway bride seeks freedom, to scandalous, Park heiress abandons wedding for mystery man. "They don't know about me yet," Taemin said, reading over her shoulder. "But they will." "Are you scared?" she asked. "Terrified," I admitted, "but not of the media. I'm scared of losing you." Her heart melted. "You won't lose me," she promised. Her phone rang. Her father. She stared at the screen for a long moment before answering. "Appa?" "Minju." His voice was cold, controlled. "Come home, now." "I can't. This is not a request. You have embarrassed our family, destroyed a crucial business relationship, and made us the laughingstock of Seoul. Come home, and we will fix this." "What if I don't want to fix it?" There was silence on the other end. When he spoke again, his voice was deadly quiet. "If you do not come home within 24 hours, you are no longer my daughter. You will be cut off from the family fortune, banned from all our properties, and I will make sure you never find work in Seoul again." The line went dead. Minju stared at the phone, her hands shaking. She knew this moment would come, but hearing the words made it real. Her father was willing to disown her rather than let her choose her own path. "What did he say?" Taemin asked gently. She told him, and he pulled her into his arms. "I'm sorry," he whispered into her hair. "I'm not," she said, surprised to realize she meant it. "For the first time in my life, I'm free to make my own choices. It's terrifying, but it's also liberating." "What do you want to do?" She pulled back to look at him. "I want to stay with you. I want to learn who I am when I'm not being Park Minju, the perfect daughter. I want to hear you play music and discover what makes me passionate. I want to take risks and make mistakes and live." "Are you sure? Your family? Your life?" "My life was never really mine, but this, us, this is real. This is mine." He kissed her then, soft and sweet and full of promise. When they broke apart, he smiled that dimpled smile that made her heart race. "So what now?" he asked. "Now," she said, taking his hand, "we figure it out together." That evening, they walked through the streets of Hongdae hand in hand. Minju wore simple jeans and a sweater, clothes she had chosen for herself, not because they were appropriate or expected. She felt like a different person, like she was finally waking up from a long dream. "I have a confession," Taemin said, as they stopped at a street food vendor. "I knew who you were. Before you told me, I mean." Minju's stomach dropped. "You did?" "I recognized you from the newspapers. Your engagement was announced a few months ago. I almost didn't help you. I thought it might be some kind of setup, or that you were just a spoiled rich girl playing games." "What changed your mind?" "Your eyes," he said simply. "I saw the fear in them, but also the determination. You weren't playing games. You were fighting for your life." They found a bench in a small park and sat together, sharing the sweet pancakes and watching the world go by. Minju had never felt so content. "I need to tell you something, too. I've never been in love before. I don't know the rules or how to do this right." "There are no rules," Taemin said. "That's what makes it beautiful." "I'm scared I'll mess this up. I'm scared I'll disappoint you like I disappointed my parents." "You could never disappoint me," he said, turning to face her fully. "You're the bravest person I know. You gave up everything for a chance at happiness. That's not disappointing. That's inspiring." As they sat together under the Seoul sky, Minju felt something she had never experienced before. Hope. Not the manufactured optimism her parents had tried to instill in her about her arranged marriage, but real, genuine hope for a future she would create herself. "Taemin," she said, his name feeling right on her lips. "Yeah?" "Thank you for catching me when I fell." "Thank you for running," he said, squeezing her hand, right into my arms. 3 weeks later, Minju was working at a small cafe in Hongdae, serving coffee and learning what it meant to earn her own money. It wasn't glamorous, but it was hers. She had moved into a tiny apartment 2 blocks from Taemin's place, and they spent every free moment together. Her parents had made good on their threats. She was officially disowned, cut off from the family fortune, and banned from all their properties. But she had also never been happier. "I have something to show you," Taemin said, as they walked home from their band's practice one evening. He led her to a small venue where a handwritten sign announced, "Midnight Seoul, album release party, tonight only." "Your album is finished?" she asked, her eyes wide. "Just yesterday," he said, grinning, "and I want you to be the first to hear it." The venue was packed with young people, all eager to hear the band that had been making waves in the Seoul underground music scene. Minju watched from the side of the stage as Taemin and his bandmates took their positions. "This first song," Taemin said into the microphone, his eyes finding hers in the crowd, "is about second chances, about finding someone who changes everything." The opening chords of the song he had played for her that first night filled the air, but it was different now, fuller, more complete. As he sang, Minju felt tears streaming down her face. The song was about her, about them, about the choice she had made to run toward love instead of away from it. When the set ended, the crowd erupted in applause. Minju pushed through the crowd to reach him, and when he threw her arms around his neck, he spun her around, both of them laughing with pure joy. "I'm so proud of you," she whispered in his ear. "I couldn't have done it without you," he said. "You gave me something to sing about." Later, as they walked home through the quiet streets of Seoul, Minju reflected on how much her life had changed. 6 months ago, she was a prisoner in a golden cage. Now she was free, poor, and happier than she had ever imagined possible. "Do you ever regret it?" Taemin asked, as if reading her thoughts. "Running away from my wedding? All of it? Your family? Your old life?" Minju stopped walking and turned to face him. "The only thing I regret," she said, "is not doing it sooner." He kissed her then, right there in the middle of the street, and Minju knew that no matter what challenges lay ahead, she had made the right choice. She had run from a life that wasn't hers and straight into the arms of a man who loved her for exactly who she was. As they walked the rest of the way home, hand in hand, Minju thought about the girl who had stood in that hotel room 6 months ago, trapped in a wedding dress and a life that felt like death. That girl had been so afraid of disappointing others that she had forgotten to live for herself. But that girl was gone now, replaced by a woman who had learned that sometimes the most frightening thing you can do is also the most necessary. Sometimes you have to run, not away from life, but toward it. And sometimes, if you're very lucky, you'll find someone waiting to catch you when you fall. Minju squeezed Taemin's hand and smiled up at the Seoul sky, full of stars and possibilities. She was no longer running from anything. She was running toward everything. Love, dreams, a future written in her own hand. And she had never felt more alive.